Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at some really interesting research on generalized anxiety disorder.
GAD.
GAD, yeah, exactly, and
GAD.
eating disorders, and specifically how therapies like mindfulness and acceptance are really changing the treatment landscape for these things. I think this will be really interesting for those of you who are listening who either struggle with these or just want to understand them better. And I think you might be really surprised by some of the findings, particularly like how worry actually works in our brains, the limitations of traditional CBT, and just how powerful mindfulness can be in changing the way that we relate to our own thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, and there's so much fascinating research out there now that's really shining a light on these conditions.
Mm.
One thing that I found really interesting was a study that followed patients with GAD who had undergone traditional CBT. And even though they learned to challenge their anxious thoughts,
Mhm.
what was really interesting is that a lot of them, their bodies kind of stayed stuck in that anxious mode. And some of them, even after extended therapy, continued to struggle.
Hmm.
So it really kind of begs the question, is it enough to just think differently, or does something else need to happen?
That's wild. So it's almost like even if you change your mind, your body's not quite on board yet.
Yeah, you're not fully there yet.
Interesting. So can you tell me a little bit more about just how GAD actually works?
Yeah, so I think we can all relate to worrying to a certain extent, right?
Right.
But with GAD, it's way more than just those everyday worries. It's this excessive worry that feels uncontrollable.
Hmm.
And it often leads to all these physical symptoms like muscle tension, fatigue, digestive issues, you name it. But one of the things that I think is really interesting is that people with GAD don't necessarily show that typical fight or flight response that we often associate with anxiety.
Oh, so not that like heart racing adrenaline pumping.
Yeah. Exactly. Instead, their systems seem to get stuck in this state of chronic tension, like they're constantly bracing for impact. And this kind of reduced physiological flexibility can really take a toll,
Yeah.
not just on your mental health, but also on your physical well-being and even your ability to adapt to new situations.
It's almost like their body is just stuck on high alert all the time.
Exactly.
So how do these newer therapies like mindfulness and acceptance actually help with that? I feel like I'm hearing those terms everywhere these days.
Right. Yeah, those are really hot topics.
Yeah.
I think sometimes when people hear that word acceptance, they think it means just giving up or resigning yourself to a life with anxiety.
Right.
But it's not about that at all. Really think of it more as instead of trying to change those anxious thoughts, you're learning to change your relationship to them.
Okay.
Acceptance is more about acknowledging those thoughts and feelings, observing them without judgment. It's kind of like watching clouds drift by.
Mm.
You notice them, but you don't try to control them or push them away.
So it's not like, oh, I shouldn't be having these thoughts. It's more like, oh, there's that thought again. Interesting.
Exactly. And research actually shows that this shift in perspective can be really powerful in reducing the intensity of those thoughts and feelings.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about pretending that they don't exist. It's about creating space around them so they don't have this power over you.
So within this framework of mindfulness and acceptance, are there specific techniques that therapists use to target those core GAD features that we were talking about before?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And one of the exciting things is that a lot of these techniques can actually be incorporated into your daily life, even outside of a therapy setting. So one example is self-monitoring,
Okay.
which is basically learning to recognize those early warning signs of an anxiety spiral.
So before it kind of takes over.
Yes, exactly.
Mm.
It's about noticing those subtle signs, like maybe you feel some tension in your shoulders or you get that familiar knot in your stomach,
Mm.
before it turns into a full-blown panic attack.
So you're kind of catching it before it crests.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can start to implement some other techniques to help kind of bring yourself back down.
Gotcha. So what are some of the other techniques?
Well, we talked about how physiological rigidity is a real hallmark of GAD.
Right.
And so relaxation techniques are designed to help counteract that by teaching you different ways to kind of soothe your body and your mind. And so that might include things like deep breathing exercises, progressive muscle relaxation, guided imagery. Really, the key is to find what works best for you.
It's like a toolbox.
Yeah.
You can try different tools and see what works best for your situation.
That's a great way to put it.
What about that rigid thinking that we were talking about? Are there specific techniques that address that as well?
Yes, definitely. One that comes to mind is called cognitive flexibility, and it basically helps you to loosen the reins on those really black and white thought patterns.
Okay.
So it's about learning to see situations from multiple perspectives, and it can be incredibly freeing. It's kind of like instead of assuming, the ending of a movie, you start to consider all the different possible plot twists.
So instead of this presentation is going to be a disaster, it's like maybe it'll go really well.
Exactly.
Or maybe even if it's not perfect, I'll learn something new.
Exactly. And sometimes incorporating a little bit of humor can be helpful too, because it kind of helps shine a light on those rigid, catastrophic thoughts, and they lose a little bit of their power.
Okay, that makes sense. Um, this all sounds great, but let's be real. If I'm someone who's like really struggling with constant worry, how do I actually put these techniques into practice? Like, how do I actually stop those thoughts from spiraling?
Yeah, it's one thing to understand it conceptually. It's another thing to really put it into action. So one technique that can be really helpful is called a worry outcome diary. And it basically involves writing down your worries and then also the outcomes that you fear, and then revisiting them later to see what actually happened.
So you're kind of like gathering evidence to
Exactly.
challenge those catastrophic predictions.
Exactly. And you might be surprised to find that things often turn out a lot better than you expected.
Yeah, I bet. And I've also heard a lot about using imagery in therapy. How does that work with GAD?
Yeah, so imagery work is really about replacing those catastrophic images with ones that are more realistic and manageable. So it's kind of like using your imagination to rewire your brain's response to anxiety triggers.
So instead of picturing the worst case scenario, you're kind of creating this new mental picture
Yeah,
that's more balanced and realistic.
exactly. Another technique is creating what are called worry-free zones. So these are specific times and places where you consciously choose not to worry. It's like building little islands of peace in your day.
So if you're someone who's like, I worry all day long, it's like, okay, well, from 6 to 7, when I'm having dinner with my family, that's my worry-free zone.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming control over where and when worry takes over. And then finally, there's this idea of expectancy-free living, which is really encouraging you to let go of those preconceived notions and to just experience the present moment more fully. Approaching each moment with fresh eyes without that burden of expectations.
So the common thread that I'm hearing through all of this is it's almost like you're becoming more present and more mindful
Yes.
and less reactive to those anxious thoughts and feelings.
Got it. It's about recognizing that you have a choice in how you respond to your internal experience.
Mhm.
Now, one final piece of the GAD treatment puzzle that I found really intriguing was the emphasis on connecting with your intrinsic values.
Okay, tell me more about that. Because when I think of values, I don't automatically think of that as being helpful with anxiety.
Right. It's kind of about shifting the focus from just avoiding anxiety to approaching life with a sense of purpose.
Okay.
So it's about aligning your actions with what truly matters to you so that even those mundane tasks can become imbued with more meaning.
So instead of being driven by like fear and avoidance, you're driven by something that's more meaningful to you.
Yes. And research suggests that that connection to values can be a really powerful antidote to all that negativity and worry that often comes with GAD.
Wow, that's super interesting. We've covered a lot of ground already with GAD, and I'm really struck by that idea that it's not just about changing what you think, but it's about changing your relationship with those thoughts and feelings. Now let's turn our attention to eating disorders. What condition does this research primarily focus on, and what are some of the key challenges in treating it?
Yeah, so the research we're looking at really focuses on bulimia nervosa, or BN. And it's characterized by these recurrent episodes of binge eating, followed by purging behaviors. And those behaviors are often driven by a really intense body dissatisfaction and a fear of weight gain. And just like with GAD, there seems to be this growing recognition that while traditional CBT can be helpful, it doesn't always address the root of the problem.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a wound that needs stitches.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
might stop the bleeding temporarily, but the underlying issue hasn't really been addressed.
Exactly. And that's why researchers and clinicians are really working hard to find more targeted and effective methods to address those core body image problems. Because a lot of times those issues stick around even after the behaviors have subsided, and that leaves people vulnerable to relapse.
Right, so it's not enough to just address the behavior you want to go to that underlying cause.
Yeah, you want to get to the root of it.
So what are some of the newer approaches that are showing promise in this area?
Well, one key area of focus is challenging those dysfunctional beliefs that really fuel those negative body image issues. But here's where it gets interesting. It's not just about changing what people think about their bodies. It's about changing how they think.
So instead of arguing about whether or not I'm fat is true or false, you're looking more at the impact of that belief.
Exactly. And this is sometimes called a functional focus. And it's really about exploring the consequences of holding on to those beliefs. So you're kind of helping the patient understand the cost of those beliefs and prompting them to maybe consider some alternatives. So it's like, okay, you believe you need to be thin to be happy. How's that working out for you?
So it's less about right and wrong and more about helpful versus unhelpful.
Exactly. And I think that makes it less confrontational,
Yeah.
which is, I think, really helpful. And within this framework, the concept of acceptance plays a really important role,
Yeah.
just like it does with GAD.
I'm sensing a theme.
Yes, definitely.
So what does acceptance look like in the context of eating disorders?
Well, it's important to understand that in this case, acceptance doesn't mean giving up on health or resigning yourself to an unhealthy weight.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's more about fostering self-acceptance,
Mm-hmm.
letting go of those rigid, unattainable standards, and finding peace with your body as it is.
So it's less about like, I need to change my body and more about I can accept my body as it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this can be incredibly liberating. It
Right.
frees up so much mental and emotional energy
Right.
that was previously consumed by, weight and shape concerns.
Yeah.
And it allows you to focus on other, more meaningful aspects of your life.
Now, I've heard of this interesting technique called mindfulness-based mirror exposure. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this technique is really cool because it combines traditional exposure therapy, where you're gradually confronting your fears, with mindfulness practices,
Yeah.
which, as we talked about, really help you to observe your experience without judgment.
Okay.
And in this case, the fear is really your own body image.
So instead of avoiding mirrors, you're kind of confronting that head on.
Exactly. The goal is to learn to observe your body without automatically reacting with, disgust or shame or anxiety. And it can be super challenging at first, but research suggests that it can lead to significant reductions in body image distress over time.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're kind of retraining your brain to look at your body in a different way.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just about changing your body image. It's also about developing a new way of coping with those uncomfortable emotions in general.
So it's like a skill that you build
Yeah,
that can then be transferred to other areas of your life as well.
exactly. It's really exciting to see how these newer approaches are kind of pushing the boundaries of traditional CBT,
Mm-hmm.
incorporating techniques like mindfulness and acceptance to address a wider range of those factors that contribute to eating disorders.
It really highlights that CBT is not just this like static thing.
No, it's constantly evolving.
It's constantly evolving. It's
Yeah.
like they're incorporating all this new knowledge and techniques, and I'm excited to see where this all goes in the future.
Me too.
Yeah.
And one thing that the research really emphasized was the importance of individualizing treatment. So,
Mm.
moving beyond those rigid protocols and really tailoring the interventions to each person's unique needs and circumstances.
So it's not one size fits all,
Exactly.
which is something I'm noticing more and more in all areas of healthcare.
Yeah, for sure.
So before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what do you think makes these new approaches so promising?
Well, what really fascinates me is how mindfulness seems to provide this common framework for addressing what seem like really different problems.
Mm.
Whether it's that excessive worry in GAD or the body image struggles in BN.
So it's kind of like the thread that connects it all.
Exactly. By changing our relationship with our inner experience, we can really create a ripple effect that impacts our mental and emotional well-being across the board.
This has been incredible so far. We've covered a lot of ground with GAD already, and I'm really struck by the idea that it's not just about changing the content of our thoughts, but it's about changing our relationship with those thoughts and feelings. So stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll continue exploring the common threads and future directions of this research. It's fascinating how these two conditions, GAD and bulimia, they seem so different on the surface, but they share this common thread when it comes to these new treatment approaches.
It really is remarkable, isn't it? It
Yeah.
points to just how powerful mindfulness can be as a tool for healing.
It really does. It's like we've been so focused on trying to fight our thoughts and feelings for so long, and now we're realizing that maybe there's a different way.
A way to work with them rather than against them.
Exactly.
And the research is bearing that out. It's not about pretending that our thoughts and feelings don't exist. It's about learning to relate to them differently in a way that allows us to live richer, more fulfilling lives.
And I think that resonates with a lot of people. It's not about erasing difficult experiences. It's about developing the skills to navigate them with more grace and resilience.
Exactly. And the research we're looking at suggests that mindfulness can play a key role in developing those skills.
So it's almost like it gives us this new lens
It does.
to view these experiences through one that allows us to see things more clearly with more compassion and understanding.
It's like instead of getting caught up in that story of, I'm anxious or my body isn't good enough, you can step back and observe those thoughts and feelings without judgment,
Right.
recognizing that they're just temporary visitors, not permanent residents.
Right. It's like they're passing through.
Yeah, and I think that shift in perspective is really key, not just for managing symptoms, but for really transforming our relationship with ourselves and the world around us.
So it's almost like learning a new language,
It
the
is.
language of mindfulness. And as you become more fluent in that language, you start to see the world in a whole new way.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And what's really exciting is that anyone can learn this language. It's not just for therapists or people in treatment. It's accessible to anyone who's willing to explore it.
I love that. It's about empowering people to take control of their own mental health and well-being. So speaking of empowerment, what were some of the key takeaways that you found in this research regarding how these new approaches are actually changing the landscape of mental health treatment?
Well, one thing that really struck me was this emphasis on moving away from a purely symptom-focused model of care.
Which makes
It
sense.
does, doesn't it? Like, if you're only focusing on treating the symptoms, you're missing the underlying cause.
You're not getting to the root of the problem.
Exactly. And these new approaches are helping us do that by focusing on things like emotional regulation, self-compassion, acceptance.
It's not just about feeling better in the moment. It's about developing the skills and insights that can lead to lasting change.
Exactly. And the research suggests that this shift in focus can lead to significant improvements, not just in reducing symptoms, but also in improving overall quality of life.
It's like instead of just putting out fires, we're learning how to prevent them from starting in the first place.
I love that analogy. It's about cultivating a deeper sense of well-being rather than just chasing after a temporary sense of relief.
And it seems like this shift towards a more holistic and empowering approach to mental health is really gaining momentum.
Well, absolutely. There is a growing recognition that true healing involves more than just alleviating symptoms. It's about fostering a deeper sense of connection, meaning, and purpose in life.
Now, while all of this is incredibly promising, I think it's important to acknowledge that the research is ongoing, and there's still so much we don't know.
You're absolutely right. As with any new development in science and medicine, we need to approach these advancements with both enthusiasm and a healthy dose of skepticism.
Right, so finding that balance
Yes,
between excitement and, just being grounded in reality.
exactly. It means asking those tough questions, like how do these interventions actually work? What are the long-term effects? Are there certain individuals who might benefit more than others?
It's like we're on this incredible journey of discovery.
We are.
And while we've made amazing progress, there's still so much uncharted territory to explore.
That's what makes it so exciting.
It really does. And it's so inspiring to see how much progress has been made in such a short amount of time, in understanding and treating these conditions. So I'm curious to hear what all of this means to you for our listeners, especially those who might be struggling with GSD or BN.
You know what I find most hopeful about this research is that it emphasizes the power we have to change our relationship with our inner experience.
It's like we're not just victims of our circumstances. We actually have the ability to create change.
Exactly. And that means we have the potential to heal and to grow even in the face of really difficult
It's
challenges.
like we all have this inner toolbox
We do.
filled with resources and strengths that we might not even be aware of.
And these new therapies are helping us to open that toolbox and discover those hidden treasures.
I love that. That's such a powerful message. It's about recognizing that we're not just victims of our circumstances. We have the capacity to create positive change in our lives, even when things feel incredibly difficult.
And that capacity for change is something that we can cultivate and strengthen over time through practices like mindfulness and acceptance.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive.
It has.
We've explored the complexities of GAD and BN, delved into the limitations of traditional therapies, and discovered the transformative potential of mindfulness and acceptance. Now, as we wrap up this episode, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought-provoking question.
Already, what is it?
How might incorporating mindfulness into your own daily life help you relate differently to your worries, your challenges, even your perceived imperfections?
That's a great question to ponder. It really invites our listeners to take this information and not just passively absorb it, but to actively engage with it.
Yeah.
Experiment with these principles and see what happens.
Exactly. Put it into practice and see how it can change your life. It really feels like we're at this turning point,
Now,
in how we view and treat mental health. Like moving away from that model of like, oh, something's broken, we need to fix it, and more towards how can we help people grow and thrive?
it's a really beautiful shift, isn't it?
Hmm.
It's acknowledging that we all have this incredible capacity for healing and for growth.
Yeah.
And these newer therapies are giving us the tools and the language to really tap into that.
So for our listeners who are really excited about this and want to explore it further, what are some really practical things that they can do to incorporate mindfulness into their daily lives?
Mindfulness doesn't have to be this big, complicated thing. It really could be as simple as taking a few minutes each day to just sit and focus on your breath, noticing the sensations of your body, the thoughts and feelings that come and go, without judging them or trying to change them.
It's like hitting pause of
Yeah,
that constant chatter in your mind.
exactly.
Yeah.
And you can bring that same mindful awareness to everyday activities, like eating or walking or even washing the dishes. Instead of letting your mind race ahead to the next thing, try to really engage with the experience that's happening right now, noticing the sights, the sounds, the smells, the sensations.
So you're taking something that could be really mundane and turning it into an opportunity to practice mindfulness.
Exactly. And the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. It's like strengthening a muscle.
Yeah.
Over time, you'll find that it's easier to access that state of mindful awareness whenever you need it.
So it's not about becoming a meditation master right away. It's about gradually integrating these practices into your life.
Yeah, and finding what works for you. There's no right or wrong way to do it. Experiment with different techniques. Find what resonates with you and be patient with yourself. It's a journey, not a destination.
This has been such an incredible deep dive. We've covered so much, from the complexities of GAD and bulimia to the transformative power of these newer approaches like mindfulness and acceptance. And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
I agree with you. And, I really hope our listeners feel inspired to continue exploring these ideas and to discover for themselves the incredible potential that lies within each of us.
Before we wrap up, I want to remind our listeners that if they're struggling with any of the issues we've talked about today, it's so important to reach out for professional help. There are so many resources available, and there's absolutely no shame in asking for support.
It's a sign of strength, actually,
Exactly.
to reach out for help when you need it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you, and I hope our listeners have found it valuable as well. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep embracing the power of mindfulness.
It's been a joy. Thanks for having me.